An ordinary flight turned into a story no one expected. Watch closely until the end. You won't believe what happened in the air. Before we start, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? The seatbelt sign had not even dimmed before the first thud struck against the back of his chair. It was not subtle. It was a deliberate shove, hard enough to jolt his frame forward. Dr. Samuel Carter, 72 years old, sat quietly in his economy aisle seat, a pressed white shirt tucked neatly into gray slacks. His posture was upright, hands folded loosely in his lap. He had flown countless times across decades of conferences, volunteer work, and international operations. He knew the rhythm of air travel, the patience it required. But even his patience felt tested now. Another kick thumped the back of his seat. He inhaled deeply through his nose, his jaw flexing once. Slowly, he turned his head. Behind him, lounging with careless ease, was a blonde woman in her 40s. She wore a navy blouse, her long legs stretched out, her black flats planted firmly against the back of his seat as though it were a footrest. Her eyes were narrowed, lips pursed in faint irritation like she was daring him to object. Samuel's voice came low and steady. "Excuse me, ma'am. Would you mind lowering your feet? You're pressing into my seat." Her eyebrows arched, surprise mixed with mockery. "I'm comfortable this way." "Comfort for one should not mean discomfort for another," he replied evenly. She gave a short, sharp laugh, dripping with sarcasm. "This is an airplane. Everyone's uncomfortable. If you want space, maybe you should have paid for first class." Samuel drew in another measured breath. His voice carried no sharpness, only quiet insistence. "I've asked politely." The woman shrugged and pressed harder, heels nudging his backrest with fresh force. "Yeah, and I politely declined." His body rocked forward with the impact. He sat still, unmoving, though his jaw tightened. The flight attendant, a young black woman named Marissa Johnson, came walking down the aisle, checking belts and trays. Samuel raised his hand slightly. "Ma'am," he said, calm but firm, "her feet are in my seat." Marissa bent down toward the row. "Miss, please put your feet down. All passengers must respect seating space." The woman rolled her eyes dramatically, sighed as if the request was unbearable, then lowered her legs. For a few moments, peace returned, but as soon as Marissa moved 2 rows forward, the flats pressed back against his seat again, harder this time. Samuel turned halfway in his chair. "Why continue?" he asked, his voice low. "I've said nothing unkind." Her eyes glittered with disdain. "Some people always play the victim," she muttered loudly enough for others to hear. "I'm not here to cater to you." His gaze held hers, calm but unflinching. "You don't know me. And yet you've already decided what I am." Her lips curled into a smirk. "Old, cranky, in my way, that about covers it." She kicked his seat again for emphasis. Samuel pressed the call button once more. A different attendant, Dev Parker, appeared this time, leaning down. "Problem here?" Samuel's tone remained composed. "I've asked her several times to stop. She refuses." Dev turned his stern gaze toward the woman. "Ma'am, this is a final warning. Keep your feet down or we'll have to reseat you." Karen's smirk deepened, defiance radiating from her. "What are you going to do? Drag me off the plane? I paid for this window seat." "Then use it respectfully," Dev replied firmly. She muttered under her breath, words sharpened with bitterness. "Figures?" Samuel angled his head. "Figures what?" "Nothing," she snapped quickly, but her smirk betrayed her meaning. He stared at her for a long moment, a flicker of sadness in his eyes. Then he turned back around, choosing silence. His hands folded again, the restraint costing him more than he would admit. Minutes passed. The cabin hummed with the usual noises, air vents hissing, soft conversations, the rattle of beverage carts. Then the plane trembled in a pocket of light turbulence. Her heels jolted against the seat again, this time with the force of the bump. "For God's sake," Samuel whispered, mostly to himself. Karen's voice came sharp and defensive. "Don't blame me. Blame the bump." "You are the bump," he said softly, voice edged now. Across the aisle, a couple of passengers were watching openly. A young Latina woman, Nadia Lopez, subtly lifted her phone, camera angled. She pressed record. Behind Karen, a small boy groaned, covering his ears. His mother tried to calm him, but Karen twisted back with a glare. "Can you shut that brat up?" she barked. Samuel turned halfway again, softening his expression as he looked at the child. Slowly, he raised his hand and demonstrated with his fingers, inhaling while lifting them, exhaling as he folded them down. "Breathe like this," he whispered. The boy copied the motion, his chest easing as his breath steadied. Karen scoffed loudly. "You're not a babysitter." "No," Samuel replied quietly, "but he's still a child. Unlike us, he hasn't learned cruelty." The line hit harder than he intended. Karen's cheeks flushed pink, though her mouth twisted into a scowl. "You don't get to lecture me," she snapped. Her heels pressed once more against his back. At that moment, Marissa reappeared, crouching low so her voice carried only to the row. "Ma'am, if this continues, we'll have to involve security when we land." Karen barked a laugh. "Security? For moving my legs? That's ridiculous." "No," Samuel said, his tone finally rising. "What's ridiculous is a grown woman acting like a spoiled child on a 2-hour flight. I paid the same as you. I deserve the same peace." Gasps sounded around them. Karen folded her arms, glaring daggers at the back of his head. Her mouth opened to retort. "I won't be told what to do by—" She cut herself short, biting the words back, but the unspoken insult hung heavy in the air. Samuel's eyes hardened as he turned just enough to meet her gaze. "Finish your sentence." She didn't. She turned toward the window, lips pressed thin. The cabin was taut with tension, passengers whispering, others pretending not to listen though their eyes betrayed them. For the rest of the flight's first hour, the silence was only broken by the occasional thud of her shoes against his seat, each one a deliberate act of defiance. Samuel sat still, body rigid, choosing again and again to swallow his anger. Yet beneath the calm surface, his patience stretched thin, pulled taut as a wire ready to snap. The chapter of silence and humiliation was far from over. The aisle lights dimmed to their steady mid-flight glow, a soft ribbon of amber along the ceiling. The hum of the engines leveled. For several minutes there was peace, thin, fragile, the kind that knows it can be broken by the smallest nudge. Then Karen's flats tapped the back of his seat again, not in an accidental brush but in a measured pulse. Press, pause, press. Dr. Samuel Carter kept his shoulders square, eyes on the patterned fabric of the seat ahead, as if the geometry could anchor his composure. He had trained his hands to be steady under pressure, hands that had traced the edge between life and death more times than he could count. He now trained his patience with the same precision, selecting silence where anger might have felt earned. Across the aisle, a pair of college-age travelers pretended not to look, whispering behind raised hands. A businessman further up tilted his head just enough to watch in the reflection of his darkened screen. The phone in Nadia Lopez's right hand held steady, camera trained low, her lips pressed together in that nervous line people wear when they know something is wrong but don't yet know what is safe to do. Marissa Johnson returned, the cart nudging along in front of her. She stopped at their row with a practiced smile. "Ginger ale? Water? Coffee?" "Water," Samuel said softly. Karen didn't look at Marissa. Wine? Red? Marissa poured carefully, then looked at Karen's feet, which had withdrawn to a neutral angle under the seat. "Thank you for keeping your feet down," she murmured, a subtle reminder she hoped could pass as gratitude. Karen flicked her gaze up. "Mm-hmm." Marissa moved on. The cart rolled, ice tinkled, and a chorus of polite thank yous followed. The moment the cart cleared the row and the bodies between them provided cover, Karen stretched again. The rubber heel found the seam in the cushion and pressed hard. A tremor traveled up Samuel's spine. He did not turn. He lifted the plastic cup, water trembling slightly, and took a sip. His throat worked once as he swallowed. He placed the cup carefully back on the tray, aligning it with the edge, a small ritual of control. "Why are you so rigid?" Karen asked, voice pitched for their row alone. "Relax, it's a plane. People shift, people stretch. Don't be so fragile." Samuel's smile was faint and humorless. Fragility and dignity are not the same. "Dignity," she repeated as if sampling an unfamiliar spice. Big word for a small inconvenience. Another press, another jolt. He reached up, adjusted the air nozzle above his head, letting the cool stream circle his scalp. "I've asked 3 times," he said quietly. "I won't ask again." Karen's eyes brightened with the peculiar energy of someone who has found a lever they enjoy pulling. "Or what? You'll write a stern letter? You'll complain?" She leaned on the last word, dripping disdain. He turned his head a fraction, just enough for their eyes to meet. "Or I will simply hold accountable the behavior, not the person." "Same thing," she said, smiling with her teeth. "Not to me." "Figures," she muttered. His gaze stayed steady. "Figures what?" Karen's jaw shifted. "You know, some people always—" She cut herself off, the unfinished thought hanging like smoke. "Always what?" he asked, not unkindly. She flashed a tight smile. "Always playing the victim." The words slid into the space between them with a practiced ease. Samuel breathed in through his nose and out through his mouth, the rhythm he taught Brighton residents before their first all-night rotation. His hands settled once more. A few rows back, the child who had earlier buried his face in his mother's sleeve peeked over the armrest again, eyes wide and glassy. The plane shivered with a small pocket of air, and the boy flinched. Samuel glanced at him and lifted his fingers once more, the gentlest invitation. Inhale, fingers rise. Exhale, fingers fold. The boy mirrored him, breaths stretching, chest loosening. His mother mouthed "thank you" across the rows. Samuel answered with a nod and a whisper, "You're doing great." Karen snorted. "What are you, everybody's grandpa now?" "I am simply human," he said. "Yeah, well, you're in my way." "It's a chair, Miss Miller," he replied. "It won't move regardless of how hard you push." She raised her voice a notch, angling it so nearby ears would catch it. "You hear the tone? Entitled. Like the rules bend for—" Another truncation. Another meaning left to ripen in the air without exposure to light. A man across the aisle frowned. "Ma'am, that's enough." Karen swung her gaze toward him. "Mind your business." He shrugged. "It is my business when I'm stuck in the same row." Nadia shifted, widening her frame in the aisle to block the view of her screen from Karen. The recording continued, timestamp marching on from blue minutes to gray. Dev Parker arrived with a quiet gravity, kneeling in the aisle so his head aligned with Samuel's. "Sir, are you all right?" "I will be," Samuel said, "if the kicking stops." Dev's eyes moved to Karen. "We've given multiple warnings. I can reseat you now if you prefer not to comply." Karen raised her chin. "I paid for my window. It's my seat." "And not his footrest," Dev said evenly. We're not debating this. Feet down, or you move." She held Dev's gaze with a stubborn glitter. Slowly, theatrically, she brought her feet flat to the floor and crossed them at the ankles. "Happy?" Dev didn't answer. He stayed still for 2 long beats, making sure the message settled. "We're done," he said, then rose and moved on. For a time, there was quiet. The engine's song returned to its blanket murmur. A passenger coughed. Overhead, the fastened seatbelt sign remained lit, a small red promise. The minutes pooled, heavy but undisturbed. Then Karen shifted again, as if her body could not tolerate stillness, as if stillness felt too much like conceding. A toe tapped the bar beneath the seat, then a heel, then the measured push resumed. The rhythm was slower now, a patient erosion instead of open assault, but its intent was unchanged. Samuel's hands closed around the armrests once. He released them. He adjusted his glasses. He studied the intricate weave in the seatback pocket, the pamphlet edge, the embossed logo. He allowed the press to pass through him and out, tried to be a conduit, not a container. "Why don't you say something?" Karen asked finally, curious in a childish way. "You were loud enough before." "I prefer being heard to being loud," he said. She laughed. "You're not being heard. Nobody cares." Nadia's phone kept recording. Marissa reappeared without the cart, crouched to bring herself eye level with Karen again. "Ma'am, last time, I don't want to escalate this. We have families on this flight." Karen blinked languidly. "Then maybe you should manage the families." Marissa's patience thinned at the edges, but her tone remained trained. "Everyone is responsible for making this space livable. Please be part of that, everyone." Karen's mouth twitched, torn between doubling down and performing compliance. She lifted her feet from the seatback, dropped them to the floor, and folded her arms with the rigid finality of a child choosing to lose gracefully. When Marissa moved on, Karen leaned forward, close enough that the scent of red wine crossed the row. "Write your little complaint," she whispered. "See who believes you." Samuel's answer was almost tender. "I'm not writing a complaint about you." She blinked. "What?" "I'm holding the behavior accountable," he repeated. "And I am holding myself accountable for how I respond." She squinted, suspicious of the ground he stood on because it wasn't the ground she knew how to shake. "You talk like a professor." "I talk like someone who has lived long enough to learn when silence has more weight than noise." Her heel hovered, indecisive, then settled to the floor. "Whatever." Up the aisle, the captain's voice slipped into the cabin, honeyed by the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we may hit some light to moderate bumps as we skirt a weather system. Please keep your seatbelts fastened when seated." A rippling series of clicks followed as belts snapped home. The plane's body flexed minutely, then steadied. The child, 2 rows back, gripped the armrest. Samuel lifted his fingers again, a small lighthouse signaling through a minor squall. Inhale. Exhale. The boy's shoulders lowered. The businessman across the aisle leaned toward Samuel, voice low. "Sir, for what it's worth, you've been patient, more than I'd be." Samuel offered a small nod. "Thank you." "Some of us see it," the man added. Samuel's eyes warmed. "That is enough." Karen made a soft noise in the back of her throat. "Oh, please." He let it pass. The minutes stretched, drawn taut like string. Karen's restraint came in stuttering fits, a heel lifted, then restrained. An impulse swallowed, a retort stored for later. Twice more she nudged the seat, a testing flick. Twice he ignored it. A third time she pressed harder than before, as if punishing him for denying her a reaction. "Don't you get tired of pretending you're better than everyone?" she murmured. "I don't pretend," he said. She smiled without warmth. "Maybe you should try being normal. People might like you more." "I'm not here to be liked," he said. "I'm here to travel from one place to another without harming anyone along the way." "That a speech?" she asked. "A sentence," he said. Her lips parted, ready to shape the unfinished word from earlier, the one she'd strangled at the throat, but a glance from Nadia and the angled lens of a dozen quiet phones warned her. She pulled back, the word dissolving before it formed. Silence settled again, heavier this time, and in that silence the cabin's micro-dramas sharpened. A teenager negotiating a shared earbud, a mother balancing a cup and a toddler, a gray-haired couple counting pills in the half-light, the static crackle of the intercom testing itself for some future need. Samuel sat with his palms open, a posture that had steadied frightened interns and anxious families, a posture he now used to steady himself. He was aware of his heartbeat, not racing but deliberate, each beat a muffled knock inside the walls of his chest. He was aware of the old ache in his shoulder from a winter morning spent shoveling a neighbor's sidewalk too fast. He was aware, most of all, of the choice, made minute by minute, to answer provocation with dignity. Karen shifted again, fidgeting, hot with the discomfort of her own thwarted momentum. She looked down the aisle where Dev stood with folded arms, eyes scanning, where Marissa checked on the boy and mother with a smile, where the quiet expectation of a cabin in flight held them all in a floating compact. We will, for these hours, be a temporary town, a moving neighborhood, a fragile community. She took a breath, long and audible. "Fine," she said to no one and everyone. "Fine." The fasten seatbelt sign winked brighter for a second, then steadied. The engine note softened as the plane trimmed altitude. A soft bump lifted stomachs, then set them down again. Someone said, "Whoa." Someone laughed too loud to cover their nerves. Samuel stared straight ahead. The child mirrored his breathing. Phones stayed angled but steady. The businessman set his jaw. The couple with the pillbox clasped hands, knuckles pale. Karen's feet were flat on the floor. For now. Samuel let his eyes close for the first time since boarding, only for a breath no longer, then opened them again, ready to choose silence one more time if he must. He did not know what the next hour would bring, only that he would meet it the way he had met this one, with control that looked like stillness, and a voice that would remain measured until the moment measured speech no longer served. Outside the window, the sky tilted from pale to pewter as the aircraft eased along the weather's edge. Inside, tension held its breath. The chapter of humiliation had not ended. It had simply thinned to a wire, humming with what might come next. He rested his hands lightly on his knees and looked at the seatback pocket, at the evacuation card, at the stitched emblem that meant nothing and everything in the middle of the sky. He had chosen silence. He would keep choosing it for as long as it could hold. And somewhere behind him, between a cooling cup of wine and the edge of a bitten lip, Karen Miller weighed the cost of the next kick. The cabin had fallen into that strange mid-flight quiet. The white hiss of engines, the muted chatter of passengers, the occasional clink of ice against plastic cups. For a brief while, Karen Miller seemed content to sulk in silence. Her shoes were on the floor, arms crossed, jaw tight, but the tension remained thick, like static before a storm. Dr. Samuel Carter sat still, posture upright, his hands folded on his lap. From the outside, he looked like a man carved from patience itself. Inside, the taut wire of restraint vibrated. Every fiber of him wanted peace, but the continued hostility at his back had left an imprint he couldn't shake. The aircraft rattled suddenly as it struck a pocket of turbulence. Overhead, bins creaked, and several passengers grabbed at their armrests. Gasps darted through the cabin. Karen yelped, shoving her feet forward in reflex, heels jamming the back of Samuel's seat again. He stiffened. His lips pressed together. He exhaled once, sharp. "Don't blame me," Karen snapped, her voice too loud. "Blame the bump." "You are the bump," Samuel said softly, but this time with an edge. A few passengers chuckled quietly, not at her, but at the truth in his words. Karen flushed crimson. Before she could retort, the sound of a tray crashing to the floor cut through the cabin. Gasps rose. 3 rows ahead, a man slumped sideways in his seat, body convulsing once before going frighteningly still. His head lolled against the aisle. His wife screamed his name, shaking his shoulders. The flight attendant, Marissa, rushed forward, her professional calm lined with urgency. "Sir? Sir? Can you hear me?" She turned, eyes sweeping the cabin. "Is there a doctor on board?" The words hung, tense and desperate. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Samuel unbuckled his belt, his hands steady. He rose, his frame straight despite his age, and stepped into the aisle. His calm carried weight now. Karen scoffed loudly. "What's he gonna do? Take a nap with the guy?" Ignoring her, Samuel reached into his shirt pocket and withdrew a slim leather card holder. He handed it to Marissa with a small nod. She read it aloud, her eyes widening. "Dr. Samuel Carter, cardiothoracic surgeon." Gasps spread in ripples. Phones lifted discreetly. Whispers darted from row to row. A handful of passengers exchanged looks of dawning recognition, names recalled from medical journals or quiet news articles. Karen's face drained of color. Marissa's voice sharpened. "Clear the aisle. Give him space." Passengers shifted quickly, pulling knees aside, moving bags. Samuel dropped gracefully to one knee beside the unconscious man. His movements were precise, practiced. He checked for a pulse with 2 fingers at the neck. Nothing. He tilted the chin, opened the airway, leaned close. No breath. "Seat flat now," he commanded, voice clipped, authoritative. "Oxygen mask, quick, elevate his legs." "Yes, doctor," Marissa said, springing into action. Another attendant, Dev, hustled over with the portable oxygen tank. Samuel fitted the mask over the man's face, adjusted the valve, and monitored the chest. For a tense moment, nothing. Then a faint groan. The man's chest rose shallowly, then steadied. "Good. Hold the mask in place. Keep the line clear," Samuel said, gesturing to the row. Relief rippled through the cabin, audible in sighs, whispered prayers, the sound of hands clasping together. The man's wife wept softly, clutching her husband's arm. Overhead, the captain's voice came firm and respectful. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are grateful to Dr. Carter for his assistance." More gasps. Passengers craned their necks. Several began pulling up articles on their phones, screens glowing with headlines. "Pioneering Heart Surgeon. Foundation funds free housing for families in need. Decades of quiet service." Nadia's recording caught every detail. The calm commands, the respect in the crew's response, the collective awe as realization dawned. Samuel gave a slow nod, monitoring the patient one last time. "He's stable for now. Continue oxygen. Check responsiveness every 2 minutes until we land." "Yes, doctor," Marissa said again, voice full of relief. Only then did Samuel rise. He adjusted his glasses, brushed invisible dust from his trousers, and walked calmly back to his seat. He lowered himself without flourish, folded his hands once more, and stared forward. Karen's mouth hung open. Her voice trembled. I didn't know." Samuel did not turn. His reply was quiet, final. "You didn't want to know." Across the aisle, the boy Samuel had calmed earlier leaned forward, eyes shining. "You're famous, huh?" Samuel allowed himself the faintest smile. "Fame is noise. Healing is enough." The hush that followed was heavy but reverent. For the first time since takeoff, Karen Miller had no words. The wire of tension had snapped. not in anger but in revelation. And the cabin would never look at him the same again. The plane's engines hummed in their steady rhythm as the cabin gradually exhaled after the emergency. The man Samuel had revived now breathed faintly under Marissa's careful watch, his wife still holding his hand with trembling relief. Whispers circled the rows, passengers murmuring about what they had just seen, phones glowing with search results that confirmed what some already suspected. Dr. Samuel Carter was not just a doctor. He was a name that had quietly shaped the field of cardiothoracic surgery for decades. But in row 18, silence sat heavier than anywhere else. Karen Miller's eyes darted to the aisle, to the faces turned toward her, to the phone cameras that had not missed a thing. Her voice, when it finally emerged, was brittle. I didn't know who he was. Samuel did not look at her. His gaze remained forward, his hands folded once more as though nothing had happened. His voice came low, quiet enough to pierce her without spectacle. You didn't want to know. The words landed harder than any rebuke shouted could have. Karen's throat worked, but no sound followed. Minutes later, the captain's voice crackled overhead. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be descending shortly. Please fasten your seatbelts. Cabin crew, prepare for arrival. Belts clicked into place. The cabin tilted gently as the plane angled downward. A hush of anticipation filled the space, not just of landing, but of what would come next. When the wheels finally kissed the runway with a jolt and roar, a wave of relief washed through the passengers. Applause broke out, rare these days but spontaneous, directed not at the landing but at the man who had steadied them in the air. Samuel inclined his head faintly, acknowledging without basking. The plane taxied to the gate. As the engines wound down, the cabin doors opened and two uniformed airline security officers stepped inside, followed by a supervisor in a blazer with a badge pinned at the lapel. Their eyes swept the cabin, stopping at row 18. Dev, the attendant, stepped forward and pointed discreetly. Here. Passengers shifted in their seats, the atmosphere electric. The supervisor approached. Ma'am, please gather your belongings. You'll need to step off the aircraft with us. Karen stiffened. What? Why? I didn't do anything. Voices erupted around her. She kicked his seat for over an hour, a man across the aisle called out. She mocked him, another added. She yelled at a child, said the mother behind her. Nadia rose halfway from her seat, her phone still in hand. It's all here, she said, the recording screen glowing in proof. Karen's face crumpled. She looked around the cabin, searching for an ally. He's trying to ruin me, she stammered, pointing at Samuel. Finally, Samuel turned his head. His face was calm, implacable. His voice was steady, not raised, yet it carried the full weight of truth. No, you ruined yourself when you mistook kindness for weakness. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the rows. The words sank like stones. Karen's lips parted, then closed again. For once, she had no answer. The supervisor looked to Samuel with professional courtesy. Dr. Carter, would you like to file a formal complaint? All eyes fixed on him. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Samuel's answer came measured, quiet, but resolute. No complaint, but consequences must exist. Without them, lessons are never learned. Karen's head whipped toward him, eyes wide, desperate. Please, I didn't mean... He faced forward again, ending the exchange with silence sharper than any retort. The officers waited by the row, patient but unyielding. Karen clutched at her bag with shaking hands. As she rose, passengers' stares pressed heavy against her. Some were angry, others simply disappointed, but none were indifferent. She walked down the aisle, the narrow path to the exit feeling longer than the entire flight. Samuel remained in his seat, calm, steady, as though the storm had passed and he was merely waiting for the sky to clear. The cabin around him buzzed with whispers, phones still glowing, passengers still shaken by the sight of a man who had endured humiliation quietly, only to reveal himself as a giant in his field. For Karen Miller, the mask had been torn off. For everyone else, a truth had been revealed. The measure of a person was not in how loudly they demanded comfort, but in how quietly they gave strength. The jet bridge groaned as it latched to the cabin door. Passengers stirred, reaching for bags, slipping straps over shoulders. Yet the usual chaos of landing felt subdued, charged with the memory of what had unfolded in the sky. Eyes darted, whispers lingered. For many, the story of Flight 227 would not end at baggage claim. At row 18, Dr. Samuel Carter sat composed, his hands folded over his small leather satchel. He had not moved since the officers escorted Karen Miller to the front. Around him, passengers waited with the quiet reverence one gives to someone who has just shifted the air in a room forever. The airline supervisor, David Reynolds, remained near Samuel's row. When most of the passengers had disembarked, he leaned closer, voice respectful. "Dr. Carter, we can move forward with a formal report. Her behavior was unacceptable. The footage alone," he gestured toward Nadia, still holding her phone, "it will stand in any investigation." Samuel's eyes rested ahead, calm as still water. "I do not seek revenge," he said, "but consequences are necessary. Without them, there is no change." David nodded, waiting. "Assign her 40 hours of community service," Samuel continued, "at my foundation's housing center in Detroit. Let her walk through those doors and meet families who arrive with nothing but fear and hope. Let her hear the stories of patients who waited months for a bed, who clutched at dignity the way a drowning man clutches at air." David's brow furrowed. "That can be arranged, Doctor. It's unusual, but it may be the best form of accountability." At that moment, the officers returned, guiding Karen carefully down the aisle. Her face was pale, eyes red from tears she had fought to keep private. She clutched her handbag as if it were armor. "Dr. Carter," David said formally, "this is a passenger in question. She understands there will be consequences." Karen's voice cracked. I'm sorry." Samuel finally turned his gaze toward her. His expression was not cruel, not triumphant, simply steady, carved from the same patience she had mistaken for weakness. "Be sorry in action," he said softly. "Change how you treat people when no one is watching. That is the only apology that matters." Her chin trembled. She opened her mouth, but no words came. For once, silence was all she could offer. Passengers, still lingering near the back, watched closely, phones lowered now. Even Nadia, who had recorded everything, let her arm fall, understanding the weight of the moment did not need further proof. The officers guided Karen toward the exit. She walked slowly, shoulders hunched, every step heavier than the one before. Samuel rose at last, shouldering his satchel. As he moved toward the aisle, the boy from earlier tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mom, why didn't everyone know who he was?" His mother smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "Some heroes don't need to be seen. They just make the world better." Samuel reached the door, pausing by Marissa, who stood waiting. "Doctor," she said quietly, emotion tightening her throat. "Thank you. Today you reminded us what real strength looks like." He gave a gentle smile. "Strength doesn't shout. It listens, and waits until it is needed." With that, he stepped into the stream of passengers, just another man in a white shirt disappearing into the airport crowd. Yet, for those who had been on that flight, he would never again be invisible. Outside, Paramedics wheeled the stabilized passenger into an ambulance. Samuel glanced through the glass, murmuring a blessing under his breath. "Live well, stranger." And with those final words, he walked forward, not toward recognition, but toward the quiet work that had always defined him. For the passengers, the lesson would linger long after. Respect is free, but arrogance can cost everything. What would you have done in this situation? Respect is free, but arrogance can cost everything. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss our next story.